Madam Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for his question. I mean, when it comes to the commercial rent assistance program, on April 9th, my colleague from New Westminster Burnaby brought forward a proposal to the government of the idea and concept of a commercial rent assistance program. We were baffled when they came back with a program that was landlord-driven and tied to mortgages. And as we want to learn more and get more answers on that through ethics committee and various different committees, why this program was created in the way it was, because we hear of ties to the Prime Minister's office and his chief of staff, which raises a lot of questions that need to be answered. We wanted to see this program as a tenant-driven program. We wanted to see it tied to the...
We have to resume debate. The Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to shout out to my colleague from Courtney Alberni, who's been the strongest advocate for small business in this Parliament, and he does extraordinary work. And I would like to underscore that amazing defense of small businesses. I'd also like to shout out, Madam Speaker, to the New Westminster Chamber of Commerce, of which I'm a longtime member, and the Burnaby Board of Trade. Also serves my area, and I'm also a member of both organizations. And coming out of the small and medium business sector, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, Madam Speaker, I think it is fair to say that we are at a crucial period through this pandemic where small businesses need to be paid attention to. And Madam Speaker, I will flag the issues around small businesses, the government's slow response. But also, I think in terms of pandemic response, the NDP has been very proud to force the government to do a whole range of things that the government was not willing to do initially. I think two areas where the government has failed the most is certainly people with disabilities that have had to wait 7 months and then only now getting a one-time emergency payment that does not by any means reach all people with disabilities, and also the small business sector. Small business sector, as my colleague from Courtney Alberni pointed out, has put into place a program that was simply inadequate. I'll come back to that in a moment, Madam Speaker. But I think it is important to note the government was very, very quick to respond when the big banks came up for a handout. Within a span of a few days, according to the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, $750 billion. $750 billion was available through various federal government institutions in liquidity support. That contrasts vividly with how slow the government has been on responding to the challenges that small businesses face. And nothing is sadder through this pandemic in the small business sector than to see people who have given their lives to their small business, to building the community, to creating jobs in their community, turning the key in the door for the very last time and slipping the key through the mail slot because they simply cannot continue. The hemorrhaging of their personal financial resources mean that they can't continue that small business. And yet the government initial response was, to say the least, inadequate. You'll recall, Madam Speaker, initially the government put forward a 10% wage subsidy, and it's the member from Burnaby South, the national leader of the NDP, that said that was absolutely insufficient given the size and scope of the pandemic. And the NDP caucus worked together, and we forced the government to actually put into place a 75% wage subsidy. That has managed to save a whole range of small businesses. Now, we also said, as the member from Courtney Alberni outlined so eloquently, we also said that, like many other countries that have put in place commercial rent assistance, we needed to have a robust response from Canada. And instead of that robust response on commercial rent relief, we saw a program that was set up for commercial lenders. Now, Madam Speaker, the Parliamentary Secretary of Finance and the member for Central Nova, who is normally a very measured person, reacted very badly when we ask the questions that are on so many small businesses' minds across the country. The facts are the following. First off, the commercial rent resistance program put in place initially was a failure. There's no doubt 2/3 of the businesses that desperately needed that support weren't able to access it because it went through landlords. That's fact one. Fact two, this was an untendered contract that was basically handed over to a company that employs, as its vice president, the spouse to the chief of staff to the prime minister. There are questions that are very obvious when a program is a failure as to why that happened. And the government still has not answered those questions in any sort of fulsome way. And thirdly, that program was set up by a commercial lender to benefit landlords that had commercial mortgages. There is a clear contradiction in that. Not only that the program didn't work, but also that a commercial lender was able to set something up that, in a very real sense, is perplexing. A commercial lender saying, well, if you got a commercial mortgage, then you can access this program. These are legitimate questions that are being asked. And that is why we've been saying from the beginning that the program that the government is announcing to replace it needs to be retroactive for all of those small businesses that were unable to access from April right through until the end of September any sort of commercial rent relief. The NDP will continue to be dogged and determined on this fact, and the member from Burnaby South, the member from Courtenay, Alberta, the entire NDP caucus believe very strongly that those supports that were denied so many small businesses over the course of the last few months have to be available retroactively for those businesses who need it the most. Monsieur le Président, j'ai mentionné tout à l'heure.
Now, I said earlier that I would say a little bit about my situation or my experience. As a business owner, it was a social business, and there were 50 employees. And I was the head of the company. And we had won 2 prizes in 2003, 2004, 2 awards. And so I understand why people are concerned, why business owners and creators are concerned, because they want to keep their employees employed, and they want the businesses to keep running.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to be presenting a petition highlighting the plight of Uyghur Muslims in China and calling for the imposition of Magnitsky sanctions against officials who are responsible for what's going on. Thank you.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétition. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to present today petition, electronic petition number 2416. The petitioners note that genetically modified foods are not labeled. Consumers have no way of knowing what they purchase, if it contains genetically modified organisms or not. They cite evidence from the World Health Organization International Agency for Research in Cancer that suggests that there are probable human carcinogens unlabeled in our foods. As a result, the petitioners ask that the House and the Parliament and the government take action to ensure the labeling of products that contain GMOs so consumers can exercise choice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétition. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Agreed. Orders of the day.
Ordre du jour, ordre éminent du gouvernement.
Government orders.
A motion in relation to consequences of the pandemic on Canadian workers and business in the name of Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Kelly, seconded by Monsieur Généreux, moves that given the pandemic has had devastating consequences on Canadian workers and business, especially in the restaurant, hospitality and tourism sectors, the House call on the government to A, immediately pause the audits for small businesses that receive the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy until at least June 2021, and B, provide additional flexibility in the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, and other support programs. L'Honorable Député de Calgary.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Speaker, and it is a tremendous honour to lead today's debate on our opposition motion that calls on the government to delay audits for small businesses until after next year's tax season, to immediately introduce legislation to enact small business support and ensure that such supports are flexible enough that they do actually reach the small businesses that they are supposed to help. Je vais partager mon temps avec
I will be sharing my time with the Honourable Member for Montmagny-Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup.
Each province and municipality enacted emergency health orders, and businesses were required to close their doors. The restaurant, hospitality, and tourism sectors were especially hard hit. The small businesses in these and other sectors are the lifeblood of our communities. They're the backbone of the Canadian economy, and the owners, workers, and customers of these small businesses are our neighbors and our friends. When governments issue orders that require a business to close their doors and lose money, these businesses are expected or have a reasonable expectation of receiving support by their government. And that's why my Conservative colleagues have worked with the government to pass various support measures as quickly as possible. It's also why we have spent the last 7 months pointing out problems with some of these support measures and offering alternative suggestions in the hope that this government will get it right and have the courage to admit when it has made mistakes, to work with opposition parties and with their own backbenchers to ensure that the government creates the most effective and most efficient programs that it possibly can. Mr. Speaker, when we left this place in the second week of March and returned to our constituencies, we were all immediately inundated with calls for help from constituents concerned about their safety, their health, their jobs, their savings, and we heard from thousands of small business owners concerned about the fate of their businesses. In my riding, I met a travel agency operator. Since the pandemic hit, her revenue is down 96%. And that does not even include the fact that she has to refund most of the money that she earned last year as people are receiving refunds for trips booked. She's exhausting her business and personal savings and extending her credit and laying off loyal, hardworking employees, and there is no end in sight. I heard from Anna, a constituent who runs a pizza takeout kiosk in a downtown office tower. Her business was already threatened by the thousands of pre-COVID energy layoffs in the very tower where she was located. And with the remaining offices nearby, with workers working mostly from home, she's down to a couple of dozen people a day walking past her stall. So, Mr. Speaker, the impacts of COVID are absolutely devastating to these business operators. I heard from a wedding officiant who is an independent contractor and does not have a business account, and she could not access the SEBA program for months. She knew that she was losing an entire wedding season, and she needed help in the spring. I heard from a constituent who operates an online industry trade publication. He had recently made significant investments in his business, and even though his revenue was collapsing, he did not qualify for federal supports back in the spring. I heard from Susan, a partner in a small oil and gas exploration company, who endured endless bureaucratic delays in trying to access the BCAP program, despite being on the threshold of receiving conventional funding on the eve of the pandemic, and despite meeting all of the criteria under that program. Each of these small business owners supports a family. Most employ a whole team of dedicated employees who are their loyal friends. The desperation and frustration in these calls, and many more calls, has been palpable. People who have worked for years to build up a business are seeing their life's work vanish before their eyes. The coronavirus is a threat to public health and safety that cannot be ignored. We know that. And we agree that all levels of government have a responsibility to ensure the safety of Canadians. But that responsibility also includes the need for a plan for economic survival for the small business community. And this is why my Conservative colleagues and I are asking this House to consider these 3 points today. Small businesses need breathing room. They need immediate assurance that they will receive appropriate government support while public health advice is harming their business. and they need programs that will be flexible enough to be actually accessible by the businesses when they need them. Mr. Speaker, tax compliance is hard enough on small businesses, and we have heard that the CRA is aggressively auditing some of the small businesses that are receiving the wage subsidy. They are immediately being told to produce large amounts of documentation with almost no notice. They don't have time to deal with onerous requests when they are in survival mode, which is why we are calling upon the government to delay compliance audits for the wage subsidy until after next year's tax season, until at least June of 2021. Mr. Speaker, prior to election, I was a small business owner, and many of my clients were also small business owners, and I know what a letter from the CRA does to a small business owner. The mere fact of receiving a request for documents is enough to ruin a whole productive day to a small business owner. There's the initial anxiety of the request, followed by frantic calls to the accountant and the lawyer, the hollow-sounding assurances that these things are just routine and not a big deal, then further scrambles to find what is being demanded, and usually with only a few days' notice. Some of the documents, at least, that are being requested in the wage subsidy audits are the same ones that as small business owners will typically have to gather in the course of preparation for their 2020 return anyway, which is why next June would be a more appropriate time to commence wage subsidy audits on small businesses. The second thing we're calling on the government to do when we put this motion on notice was to immediately introduce legislation to enact promised extensions and amendments to support programs. The fact that the government has done so without waiting for a vote is welcome, but it was long overdue. The government knew that its failed rent subsidy program was coming to an end in September. It knew that its wage subsidy program was ending in the fall, and it knew that other programs like the CEBA and the BCAP have problems that are well known. So instead of coming into this fall session with legislation ready to go in September, this government, mired in its own conflicts of interest and scandal, prorogued the House in August and seemingly did no advance work on necessary legislative changes. They came into September with a recycled throne speech, some vague hints about how they might address aid for small businesses, and then waited until after an opposition motion was on notice to introduce measures into the House. Desperate small business owners and workers have been waiting for details for months. Finally, we're calling on the government to ensure that its aid programs actually reach small businesses that need them. The government's original rent subsidy program failed most small businesses. And it was panned by tenants and landlords alike, and I think the government knows and has acknowledged that its initial approach to rent subsidy was a failed approach. Other programs like CEBA and BCAP also had problems, and opposition members raised concerns about these programs months ago, and while some issues were dealt with along the way, some were not. This government now has an opportunity to get it right. They can do so by taking the time to listen to opposition MPs when we debate Bill C-9, because the Conservative caucus always stands up for small businesses. We have their backs. We were there standing up for small businesses when this government went to war with them in 2017 with draconian tax changes. We were there standing up for small businesses when the Prime Minister said that they were just a way that wealthy people avoided paying taxes. We were there when Bill Morneau said that wealthy Canadians use complex corporate structures to avoid taxes, while he himself continued to own shares in a company that he regulated through a complex web of private companies. We were there standing up for small businesses when this government imposed taxes that were particularly hard on restaurants, tourism, and the hospitality industry, like the escalator tax on alcohol, higher payroll taxes, and of course, the carbon tax. We have been with them since March. We've been there ensuring that aid measures for small businesses pass expeditiously. We have worked with the government. We have not held up legislation. but we've also been there making constructive recommendations to improve programs. And we stand there with them now, Madam Speaker. We are calling upon the government to deal with the growing crisis of small businesses. Prior to COVID, this government failed to respect small businesses. During COVID, they've enacted programs that in some cases were poorly designed and difficult to access. This government now has an opportunity to make amends with the small business community. They can show small business owners and workers that it shares our conservative support for the hardworking men and women, small business owners. They can do so today by standing with the opposition and supporting this motion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The member is wrong in many ways. This government has been recognizing the valuable role the small businesses play in our country, being the backbone of a lot of the job creations that have created. Pre-pandemic, we saw small businesses working with government creating over 1 million jobs, which is far greater than the previous administration did in 9 years. Mr. Speaker, in regards to the pandemic, we have consistently been working alongside small businesses, and that's why we saw the implementation of programs such as the wage subsidy program, the rent relief program, and we continue to work with small businesses, consulting with them every day to make sure that we're trying to meet to the best of our abilities the needs of our small businesses. And I'm wondering if the member opposite could maybe inform the House or let the House know in terms of what he feels specifically that he would like to see the government do with regards to small businesses, reflecting on the motion specific. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Well, Madam Speaker, I mean, the first thing they could do is stop treating them like tax cheaters. Exactly. The first thing they could do is stop auditing them, coming in and asking for onerous documentation while they are in survival mode, trying to cope with the pandemic and to be able to actually survive. So it would be a welcome relief to small business owners to be shown some respect from this government that has treated them so poorly over the years. I'll leave it at that, Madam Speaker, and hope that we can get more people involved in the debate than just the member from Winnipeg North.
Questions and comments. L'Honorable Dip.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Neigette-Témiscouata-les-Basques? No, sorry. Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. We agree pretty much with what's being proposed here. Commitments were made that we agreed with, but it's taken a while. So let's be serious. The wage subsidy was designed to help people in an emergency, not to help the political parties pay their staff. We know that the Conservatives have tabled this bill. Both potential leaders proposed to refund it. On the Liberal side, we're not so sure. But what's the status on that promise? The Honourable Member for Calgary Rocky Ridge.
Well, I'm not going to talk about political parties today, Madam Speaker. I'm here to talk about workers in small businesses. And small business workers need to be able to keep their jobs and to be able to remain in their jobs. And this was a failure of these programs in that the emergency response benefit was greatly oversubscribed at a time when the wage subsidy was undersubscribed. This shows how the programs themselves were a failure to small business community, the small business community, who struggled to keep workers employed.
Member for Courtenay-Alberni.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague from Calgary, Rocky Ridge, for his speech. Madam Speaker, as much as I appreciate his speech, one thing he did say is Conservatives have always been there for small business people. Like him, I was a small business owner in 2008, and the Conservatives were definitely not there for small business people. They were there for big banks and big corporations, Madam Speaker. My question to my colleague is, given that they've rolled out this flawed design program of the Canada Emergency Rent Assistance Program, given that they're going to fix it and they admit that they're wrong, the Liberals. Does my colleague agree that they should be rolling out legislation to backdate the fix to April 1st for those that didn't get the help they need, so that small businesses aren't left out if their landlord didn't apply for a program that they should be eligible for, like everybody else? Does my colleague agree that the Liberals should fix this and backdate it right now?
The honourable member for Calgary Rocky Ridge, 30 seconds.
Well, Speaker raises a good point. The former program failed small businesses, and I don't know how many businesses actually have failed over the summer and in the spring, or how many may be on the verge of failure because of the failure of that program. He raises a valid point, and I hope that the government will listen to opposition MPs and create the best program that they can for small business owners.
Reprise du débat.
Resuming debate.